line. For the third time during PitchCon, we're going to see Kate Preusser. Hey, what's going on?
Oh, it's great. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Having a fantastic time here.
Oh man, being Lookout Landing, of course, you guys know Kate, and today's an interesting day, and this panel, well, it's kind of fitting given what came out today.
Yeah, I have a lot of apologies for everybody who's watching the panel because I plan to spend this morning planning and practicing and rehearsing. I always like to kind of talk through these things before I do them and make sure the right words come out, which makes me and the president of the Mariners, Kevin Mather, different people, I guess, because he
Yeah, a little bit.
Showed up at a Rotary Club meeting and just kind of said a coterie of wild things. Let's put it that way. It was like Camille Saint-Saëns could never. It was wild stuff. So been dealing with the fallout of that all morning. Honestly, though, it's great because it's not great. It's terrible, but it makes an interesting loop in because I think what it really does is tells you how racism and sexism and exclusion costs all of us time, right? Like it's costing me time today. It's costing this panel time. You have to stop and deal with the consequences of this stuff. And it's not, racism is not time efficient. Like,
right.
I mean, maybe at one time, but no, it's not. It costs all of us, not just the people you think of being as most directly impacted by it. So,
well, I don't want to cut into your time anymore. I'm actually going to bring everybody in here.
Let's do it.
Randy, welcome. I'm so happy that you're here. Obviously, Janice and Jamal, thank you, really, all of you. Thank you so much for being a part of this panel. It means a ton to me. And everybody, yep, I hope you enjoy PitchCon. If you can, go to go.rallyup.com/PitchCon. Let's help raise some money for a fantastic cause in Feeding America. I'm going to dash out. Really, thank you so much for being a part of this.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you for setting this up. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. Just one more pitch to anyone who's watching this to definitely please donate because half of the profits go to Feeding America. And obviously, since this panel is talking about diversity and inclusion, and we know who is suffering the most during the pandemic, during this, who is hungriest in this country, it is people of color. So if you can, anything that you can share would be fantastic. All right, so we introduced me. I'm Kate Preusser. I'm the managing editor of Lookout Landing, which is SB Nation's Mariners site. I've had quite a morning, but I want to introduce my panel. We have Janice Scurio. Can I say Scurio or Scurio?
It's perfect. Either way. I love it. Love it.
All right. Janice has bylines at Southside Hit Pen, which is the Sports Illustrated arm for the White Sox, Southside Sox, which is SB Nation's White Sox blog, Baseball Perspectives, and most recently at NBC Sports Edge, formerly Roto. I did not know that for you. Congratulations, Janice.
Yeah, thank you. It's like literally, just the past week it was announced. So
that is fantastic. Yay. All right, so we have Janice, and then also Jamal is joining us. Jamal is a software executive and Army veteran. You can find him at Wilburg on Twitter, and he has writing credits with Bleacher Report and D-Rays Bay, which is SB Nation's Tampa Bay Rays arm, if you see like a pattern here. And then finally, we have Randy Wilkins, who is an Emmy Award-winning director with work. His work's been featured on ESPN. If you wondered why the MLB Jackie Robinson Day spot was so good this year, that was him. And I pulled this off your Twitter bio. I did not know this about you, a former aspiring professional baseball player. So I'm excited to get into
a long time ago.
Well, I'm excited to get into all of that. I just want to say really quickly about the why of this panel. I always start off panels like this. Janice and I did one last year about women in baseball. And I always say, I hope this is the last panel like this I'm going to be on, because what I hope is we won't have to have a panel about inclusion because people will just be included. But in the meantime, this panel continues to exist because, as we see, first of all, we want to raise awareness among those who make up the majority of the industry right now, who are in charge of writing those narratives. I think we saw that really clearly this year with some of the passings we've had, like Tommy Lasorda and sort of the odes that came out about him without a word about his homophobia and the chilling effect that that had on the LGBTQ community in baseball for years. Obviously, Hank Aaron and the immediate rush to mythologize him, lionize him, talk about how he overcame racism without really, again, putting the onus of solving racism on the person who experienced it and not on the systems that perpetuate it. So as the more we see these kinds of narratives get perpetuated, the more we know, like, there's work to be done here. But also we want to, for people who are out there who want to get into the baseball industry in some form or another, but are looking at it and say, nobody here looks like me or talks like me or has my background or my experiences. We want to just kind of extend that and say, like, we're here and provide maybe some resources, maybe tell our stories about how we got involved. And hopefully that will help spark the next generation. So each one, teach one, reach out a hand up, that kind of thing. All right. So let's start with just kind of getting to know our panel. I'm going to go to you, Jamal, first. What do you do, or how long have you been doing it? How are you involved with baseball, and why baseball? Which I think it's fair to say it's one of the whitest of sports. Maybe not like the whitest. I'm sure there's like I don't know, competitive tea drinking or something. The Brits probably have something, but yeah, it's pretty white. So what pulls you and what keeps you here?
Yeah, so I think again, Kate, thanks so much. Just honored to be part of this panel. It started off, I've been a sports fan my entire life, so I think that's the pull. It's just this natural obsession's probably the better word than love for sports and anything with a scoreboard. I mean, being a sports management major in college, but I really started writing in 2010 for Bleacher Report on that platform, and then recently started writing again for D-Race Bay, as you mentioned, on the SB Nation platform. And really just an opportunity to talk about what you're passionate about, but also in a way that's authentic and meaningful to me, and having a different perspective on some of the stories and some of the items that we see come up. And why baseball? I think it's interesting as someone that's both a hockey fan and a NASCAR fan as well. Although baseball is probably not the widest of sports in demographic, it probably is in terms of behavior, especially as we look over past the past 12 months and we see how other sports have approached some of the items that are happening within society in a way that outnumbers their participants in term and their fans in terms of demographics and those other items. So just really happy to share my thoughts to whoever's interested in reading them and keep these conversations going.
Fantastic. Thank you. Janice, how about you?
Yeah, so like Jamal, I've been a sports fan my entire life. Most of my fandom is actually inherited from my mother. So my mom is an immigrant from the Philippines, and so part of her assimilation into American culture was watching sports. So she's also big on tribalism too, regionalism. So as soon as I was old enough, she says, "Hey, we live on the south side of Chicago. We are White Sox fans, just so you know." And I was like, "Okay, all right, fine, great." So a lot to this day, like she speaks mostly in Hawkisms. So like if she's watching a game, she'll describe like a pop-up as a can of corn, which is absolutely hilarious. But yeah, I've always had sports opinions my entire life, but have never really, I guess, articulated them in a sense that I would think anyone else would be interested in hearing them. So as soon as I started talking to other people, making friends of writers from other teams, I started to realize that, that my voice was important and that people seemed to like what I had to say. So hopefully, I mean, we'll probably speak a little bit more to this later on in the panel. But early on, no one really looked like me. So therefore, that's another reason why I didn't really think I belonged or my voice wasn't necessarily like appreciated. But now that I'm kind of writing for a little bit longer, I've only been writing for the past 2-3 years. So I'm still relatively new to the whole industry altogether. So I'm hoping that, hopefully there's like someone like me who is young and like doesn't think they belong. If they see me working and they see me be successful, then they can pull some encouragement and inspiration from that.
And we will definitely touch on sort of that imposter syndrome that you mentioned and how that might track a little differently from those of us who don't necessarily see our voices represented as much in the greater baseball community at large. But Randy, you had sort of a different path between your sort of playing career and also that you're a visual storyteller. Like, we're talking a lot about putting words on paper. You're a visual storyteller. Talk to us a little bit about how you fell in love with baseball.
Well, I was in love with baseball for as long as I can remember. It's always been the number one sport in my life. It really is a part of my identity, along with the other sports, but baseball, in a way, allowed me to interact with my community and larger communal spaces and communities outside of mine. It allowed me the opportunity to meet various different types of people. So baseball is pretty intrinsically wrapped in my identity from as far back as I can remember. I think it's easily, for me at least, the best sport. I'm not sure that the league matches the sport in terms of my love and endearment for the game. I think it's important to make a distinction between MLB and baseball.
Yeah.
I'm a fan of the MLB. Obviously, I've partnered with them, so there's a lot of people there that I admire and respect and have built friendships with. So I appreciate that. But in terms of the specific game and the sport, my love for it is second to none, especially since I had the opportunity to play it for a while. I also write. I mean, I'm a writer and co-founder for Views from 314 Feet. So that's a Yankees blog that filled the River Ave Blues slot once that was shut down. So for me, it's storytelling on both ends. It's my career as a filmmaker, but also my interest and skill as a writer as well. So for me, it's all the same. Like, whether you're using the visual medium or you're using the pen, you're trying to connect with different communities and different people to tell your perspective on these narratives. So being able to tell Jackie Robinson's story from a different perspective was really important to me, and highlighting his contribution as an American patriot and as someone who was on the front lines of protest and trying to bring in institutional change to the country was important to me. And luckily I had the skill set to help tell that story for the spot. And, when I write, I feel like whatever space I'm in, I belong there. Like, I never really had the worry or thought that I didn't belong somewhere, or, I wasn't supposed to be there. If I'm there, then I'm supposed to be there. That's always how I've looked at it. And I trust my voice, and I trust the voices of many people around me. So I never really bought into if I'm not being represented, then I'm not supposed to be there. Or people that look like me or view the world the same way as I do don't belong to be there. So that, in all honesty, wasn't something that I struggled with, because that thought never entered my mind. So, thank you for having me, and thank you for having me be a part of this conversation.
Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about how you came up through baseball and your playing career, because I wonder a little bit, as somebody who didn't play myself at all, for me, sometimes that is something that fuels a little bit of my imposter syndrome is, I didn't pitch in college like some of my colleagues. And so how can I really know like what the body goes through when it throws a pitch? So do you think that your background as a player has helped you kind of have that footing? What gave you such a strong sense of self and belonging?
I don't necessarily think it was playing baseball, because I feel that way across the board. I mean, I feel that way in film. I feel that way when I walk down the street. I feel that way when I walk into the store. I feel that way when I'm writing about baseball or watching baseball. It's not something specific just to the game. I think I had a strong foundation from my family and my academic background that encouraged me and supported me and gave me the space to find my own voice. I was always encouraged to think independently and think critically and to challenge, and that it was okay to be intellectually curious. It was important to learn opinions and perspectives from people that weren't like me, that didn't see the world the way that I did. All of those things were encouraged. I come from a family of educators. So, and pretty smart people running my family. So they always encourage me to be okay and be comfortable with having a voice, but thinking things through, not just like spouting stuff out, making sure that you understand what you're talking about. And if you don't, ask questions. And if you feel something that doesn't really make sense or doesn't sit right or doesn't necessarily connect, you challenge it, but you do it with respect. But when it comes to baseball specifically, yeah, I mean, I think having that background helped me out a lot. I mean, I understand that mentality. I understand that competitive nature. I understand that there are a lot of gray areas. So for people that haven't played competitive sports, a lot of times there's this black and white binary thing. But when you're playing, you're not really living in a black and white world. You're living in a gray world because there's some things you have to do that you might not consider off the field, but because the goal is to win, you have to make certain sacrifices or make certain decisions to achieve that goal. And also being a black baseball player or a former black baseball player, I am well aware and acutely aware of institutional racism in the sport. And I know very much what that coded language is and how it reveals itself. So I think when it comes to talking about the game, I do lean back on my prior playing experience, but I also continue to learn about the craft of the game as well. Like, I just love baseball. So I dig deep into like hitting mechanics, approaches, like all that crazy stuff that I don't need to apply anymore because I don't play. But it's just a general and genuine interest in learning more about the craft that also helps me as well.
I think that's something really interesting is talk about, like, a lot of times I feel like we're taught that our perspectives are somehow lesser than if you didn't play or like if you come from this outside. But what I really appreciate about what you just said is like, no, the width of my experiences, the breadth of my perspective makes me stronger, makes me better, makes me know more and be able to see this gray area more. Whereas I think especially when you see like what was happening with the Hank Aaron narrative after his death it was a band of writers who have this band of experience who were talking about what they could connect to as opposed to, well, yes, Hank Aaron did exist here. He also existed here. And the stories that were told were not telling this spectrum. So that our diversity is our strength. I know it's a cliche, but it is, I think, sometimes something that you feel like can work against you, but it is actually a strength. I was also interested in how you talked about your family giving you this strong background. Janice, you mentioned a little bit your mother and that again, the strong family lineage. Jamal, what about for you? Who was that person who kind of helped you get a start or helped you stand where you are?
It's a very similar story. It comes from family and close friends. So being the first person in my family born in the United States, all my family's from Guyana and South America. It was just, if there's anything that you want, you just go figure out a way to accomplish it. And there's no reason that I'm going to be the reason that I don't get anything, right? So I'll try and put it out. Someone else is going to have to be the barrier or the roadblock versus myself. And it's just a mentality of an approach to going through and just achieving different items and not having that self-limitation or that overall self-doubt. And again, I think similar to you, I didn't play baseball growing up. But I do fully recognize that as a male writer, that's not something that people automatically think and throw in my face. But I think that the advantage to it is there are different things that I don't assume and different things I don't approach to it because I didn't play the game, that I have a different intellectual curiosity about than someone that might have played the game and take something for granted or look at something through a different angle. So I think taking all those different approaches and experiences that we all have and just, again, passion for the game that comes out in the work that we do.
Absolutely. Janice, how about for you? And again, when we're kind of coming at this from people who didn't play, at least I didn't play collegiately. I don't know if you did, but I did not play past like third grade. When I got hit a bunch of times, I was a left-handed catcher, and I was like, "Oh no, this is not." I treasure this too much to continue with this. But it is something that I feel like it's an automatic assumption a lot of times, or I feel like a lot of times women have to say like, "Oh well, I have this experience with the women's national team, or I have this experience with being a college baseball player." And even as we're seeing women hirings across MLB, a lot of times it comes with that but she has her. Whereas I don't think that's always something that we see held up for male coaches being hired into the same. So I'm wondering how you got your start, who helped you get a start with that, and how you navigate that territory.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I didn't play baseball past third grade, I want to say. First of all, they made me throw right-handed. I'm left-handed, so
Me too.
I think about that a lot, and I'm like, why was the case? So essentially, the reason why is because we didn't have any left-handed gloves available, so it was just kind of like all hand-me-downs. So that's mainly the reason why I had to throw right-handed. But anyway, that's a story for another day, perhaps. But yeah, I basically got my start by essentially just talking about baseball on Twitter, which essentially is, yeah, a form of microblogging, perhaps. But I started just just kind of formalizing my thoughts and like finally externalizing them and just putting them out there. And so generally I was received well by the, I guess, general baseball Twitter community. And then I got noticed by the editor of Southside Sox. His name is Brett Ballantini. He basically came into my DMs and said, hey, like, have you ever thought about writing about baseball? And my answer was like, yes, no, sort of, maybe. I actually had to really think about it, because having read blogs like some of the popular ones kind of on the White Sox side are Southside Sox, Sox Machine, Sox on 35th. I always thought that it was all just very highbrow, just incredibly just complex. Essentially, in summary, I was making way too big of a deal out of it. And I thought that it was something I could never do. So naturally, I think I might have waited about a week and a half and waffled on emailing Brett back and saying, like, yes, this is something I want to do. This is something that I can definitely put my mind to. So essentially it was just kind of pushing that initial doubt to the side and just being open to new experiences. I mean, I like to think of myself as a naturally curious person. I really love just learning about the world in general and how it works. So I kind of sat myself down and was like, how is this any different? Like this is going to be a learning experience. This is going to make me a better writer. And a better person too. So that's when I just decided to, just email him back, tell him that, I'm all for being brought on staff, even though I have like no baseball writing experience other than just putting my hot takes on Twitter. It essentially was an investment in myself when I sent that email back. And then after that, I've written for a handful of other sites since. So it's been a great journey.
I think taking that first step and saying yes to yourself, or I like Jamal, what you said about, well, the only roadblock that's going to get put up is one that I'm going to put up. Like, I'm going to press forward and I'm not going to allow myself to do that. I'd like to talk about like a struggle and a success, like something that you've struggled with in your career, whether it's those feelings of like, well, I'm not exactly sure, like, I'm not exactly sure if I belong in this space, or like, what is the point at which I cross from a hobbyist into a professional? At what point do I put a price on myself, and what price is that? When do I feel like I'm at the point where I can? And like a point at which you felt like, okay, yes, like I deserve to be paid for my time or compensated for my time in doing this. I know what I'm doing. I have valuable contributions to make. So Randy, let's go to you first, since you have quite a resume.
I don't know. I'm not sure that those questions ever stop, because I primarily work in an industry that is based on rejection. Like it's almost like the baseball equivalent of.
I was just gonna say.
Yeah, I mean,
failure.
Yeah, I mean, I know what my skill set is. I know what my talents and abilities are, but sometimes it goes beyond that. And in many cases, it really isn't about that stuff. It's about networking. It's about people that you know, relationships that you foster. I don't work in an industry that's built on meritocracy. So there's always this constant battle to put yourself in a position to be able to tell the stories that you want to tell. And in many ways, it's about the people that you know that can help you out along the way. And you do that by building relationships and creating really good work that people feel that they can invest in you for future stories. But it really was the tweet thread that I wrote last year about George Floyd and MLB, and that kind of taken off while a show that I did for Apple Plus came out at the same time. And I think that it's timing as well, because I wrote that Twitter thread, a lot of people responded to it, and then I had the attention of a lot of people, and then the show came out, and the show was appropriate for the time that it was released, and then it just started to avalanche and kind of like blew open the doors for me. So a lot of times it's just perseverance. It's reminding yourself that your voice is important, reminding yourself that, if you continue to create and tell stories and you are vulnerable enough to share those with people, which I think a lot of folks don't like. They make stuff, but then they keep it to themselves because they have hesitations that somebody might criticize them, or people won't agree, or they won't like it. A lot of it is just putting your work out there and being vulnerable enough to share it with the world. And I think if you do that enough and you leverage it to build relationships with people, and you share your voice and your perspective, and you continue to improve your craft, you're putting yourself in a position to overcome those rejections that come with the nature of whatever industry that you're in. So for me, it was perseverance and continuing to capitalize on my passion and love for telling stories. And then it all came to a head, and fortunately I've been able to tell even more stories than I thought I would have been able to tell maybe 3 or 4 years ago.
I'm sensing a thread that's developing here, which is just the idea of saying yes to yourself and like not shutting yourself down at any or fearing that rejection, but just like, and continuing to always push forward and continue to interrogate yourself and continue to do stuff that really matters, which can be hard when you're trying to balance that with the stuff that pays the bills, which isn't always the stuff that is closest to your heart, right? We also, Janice mentioned a little bit about Twitter, and then Twitter obviously played a big role in your story. Twitter has been huge for me as well, as far as just getting my name out there. Jamal, I was wondering if you've leveraged social media at all to kind of, if that has been a factor in getting you where you are, or you've just been doing that grind of submitting place after place after place.
Yeah, no, I think Twitter was a spark for me. Back when I first started writing for Bleacher Report and coming back into writing, I took a few years off working on full-time work and all the other items. But there was an ESPN article that went out, and I'd been writing for Bleacher Report for a little bit, but the photo that they used to describe the Tampa Bay Rays attendance was just didn't seem to match the time. It was an old Devil Rays photo, and I'd spent the time Google searching and found the original Getty image from the photo, which was a midweek day before a hurricane was about to strike Tampa. And I just shared it out there, and then all of Ray's Twitter, it took off. And the next thing I know, all the local talk shows wanted me to call in and talk about being the ESPN ombudsman, I think one of them referred to me as. And then, through that, and then other folks started getting a chance to get exposed to the writing that I was doing at the time, and then got an opportunity to be a guest host on an AM radio show, and then eventually be one of the co-hosts on there. And it really all started from that one day on Twitter. And then after I took some time off from writing, I just started getting back. I had the itch. I want to write. So I was like, you know what? I'll just start getting back on Twitter. And I started getting back on Twitter and posting tweets during the days. And then, similar to Janice's story, Danny Russell, who manages the D-Rays base site on SB Nation, he slides in my DMs, like I like to remind him. And then he's like, hey, have you ever thought about writing? And I was like, well, it's been on my mind to get back into it. So then dust off the skills. And I think that's been an interesting piece of taking the time off and having a quality bar that you think you've set for yourself, and then trying to get back on the bicycle and get back to that level. But no, Twitter has been really huge in both developing relationships as well as getting an opportunity for exposure and visibility.
I think that's one of maybe the only positive stories I've ever heard that started with, it all started that one day on Twitter. Like, usually those stories do not end well. Kevin Mather is going through that right now, I'm pretty sure. I think what's interesting about Twitter too is it can be kind of a level playing field, and it's almost easier to get your work out there and get it in front of people without you personally having to show up places and put yourself in that space. You can just like send the tweet and put it out in the world, which obviously we've seen has good and bad consequences. Janice, I'm wondering if there's like, as far as that got you into the world, was there a moment of like, oh no, what have I done? As you got deeper and deeper into this world, or have you just like barreled on full bore, full confidence, gaining confidence every day?
A little bit of both. So I certainly most renegotiate those boundaries of being a fan, being a hobby, and being a hobbyist, and being a professional every day. Just mainly because I've spent most of my life as a fan. And so to kind of shift gears and just kind of swerve towards the professional side has been interesting, to say the least. So I think one thing that happened during this past season, I was one of a handful of people that covered games in person. So I was a credentialed member of the media. And so this was still when I was relatively like fresh in my career. I mean, I will say that all the time. Like, I still think I'm relatively fresh, but someone on Twitter saw that I posted a photo of the ballpark, like completely empty. It was a scrimmage game about the White Sox versus the White Sox. And the comment was like, wait a minute, why are you there? And I was kind of taken aback by that. Just mainly because I was under the impression, at least like with my credential, that, you know, I belonged there. And that comment for a brief moment was sort of this, wait a minute, like why are you in particular there? So I took offense to that. So yeah, I just basically kept it professional. I just basically was like, hey, I am going to be covering the team this season. So that's definitely no small responsibility with no fans in the stands. Essentially, White Sox fans are relying on me for all of their player coverage, all of their game coverage. And so, yeah, essentially, I was their eyes and ears throughout all of summer camp. I honestly can't remember how the rest of that interaction went. I just remember how mad I was and how offended I was. And also, too, that person that doesn't follow me anymore. So
it sucks because you'll get like 10 great comments, but the one that sticks is the piece of criticism. Like,
yeah.
Why am I holding? And that's been a real challenge for me, is like, why am I holding on to this email that I got where the guy clearly didn't even know who he was writing to, because he's complaining about me to the editor of Lookout Landing, to the editor of Lookout Landing. Like, this Kate Preusser woman is so negative. Like, she should really get back in the kitchen where she belongs. I was like,
damn.
I am the droid you're looking for, so I don't know what you're talking about there.
Wow.
So for me, it's always been a challenge of like balancing those things. And that is probably the biggest piece of advice I'd like to give to somebody who wants to come up with me, is like, the bad days are going to happen, and people are going to say mean things to you, or you're going to get rejected, and you just have to, those things can loom so large in your mind, but you really have to practice mindfulness and figure out how to block that out and just focus on doing your work and doing things that that really please you. So I'd like to know, like, what is your best advice? That's my best advice for somebody who wants to get into the industry. I'd like to know what your best advice is for somebody who wants to get into the industry. And we'll start with you, Jamal.
I think it's one, what you just mentioned, but also write what you want to read. So what's out there that you have an interest in that isn't readily available, and then find a way to write and discuss those items.
Absolutely. I think, and because if you want to read it, chances are there are 10 more people who want to read it too, 100 more people, 1,000 more people who want to read that take. And as far as like finding yourself a niche and addressing something that hasn't been before, that is going to keep you getting assignments. So great tip. How about you, Janice?
I think my biggest piece of advice is to be selective on who and what you take seriously. The best example I have of this is I just recently started covering baseball on a more national perspective. Again, pushing my own boundaries, kind of writing more about than just the White Sox, but just like thinking about baseball in general. Like that's huge. I've never done that before. But again, like I definitely want to step out of my comfort zone. As soon as, DJ Short is the editor over at NBC Sports Edge. So he approached me with the opportunity. And of course, I mean, I almost said no, just mainly because, again, uncharted territory. But again, like I almost regressed to before even I started writing and was like, wait a minute, can I really do this? Can I not really do this? So I just pushed myself past that and said yes. But when I talk about not taking people seriously, someone commented on one of my articles from last season, basically holding it against me that I didn't see another game that happened after I had written the recap. It was a fairly scathing comment, I guess, to summarize that. And again, yeah, I mean, the bad days are going to happen, but you can't take that seriously. You just have to kind of trust in your own talent, trust in your work, and know that the right people are going to, just elevate your platform.
I find a lot of times too that, and I don't know if this criticism goes the same for my male colleagues, the goalposts get shifted a lot on me when the criticism is raised. And for me, trying to figure out or thinking through like, well, that's a you problem. That's not a me problem. And separating like, what is valid criticism that's going to make me better? And what is you kind of popping off because you're mad that I'm in the position that I am? Right. And learning to separate that wheat from the chaff. How about you, Randy?
Yeah, sorry.
I have a couple pieces of advice. One, I mean, it's okay to use the mute button on Twitter. You know, like
the mute button is your friend. That's a very good piece of advice. You
don't have to be around that energy. You know, like it's okay to protect your space and protect your energy. Like you can tell pretty quickly if somebody is engaging you for a conversation, whether they agree with you or not, or when they're trying to like get at you for whatever reason. Mm-hmm. You know, and you can protect your energy. You don't have to engage with it. You don't even have to see it. Like, you know, I have interactions with people on Twitter, especially since my profile got a little bit larger over the last year. And you can tell right away who's with the BS and who actually wants to engage in a real meaningful conversation with you. And the people that bring the BS, you give them one or two shots. And if it keeps going, just get rid of them. You know, like you don't need that energy. And I think that also helps your well-being and your mental health in a lot of ways, because people will feel the need to try to dampen your spirits because, you know, whatever energy that they have. The other thing I would say is just build relationships with people. You know, like I agree with all the advice given, so I don't want to repeat it, but I think it's also important to point out that relationships are really important, and it's okay to build with people that are like-minded as you, and you can build your own collectives. Like Views came from a couple guys who used to write for River Ave Blues but weren't the prominent writers, and wanted to build their own platform and wanted to fill that niche, but also create more exposure for themselves. And we were cool because of interactions on Twitter. And, you know, I hadn't really written baseball specific stuff before that, but I mean, I could write and I knew baseball. So they reached out to me and we created this collective together, and it's done really well. It's created opportunities for all of us in a lot of different spaces. So relationship building is really important, and it doesn't always have to be with prominent people. It can be with your peers, and it could be with people that have the same aspirations as you, the same interests as you, and you can build something together. You know, you could build something from the ground up and command people's attention, as long as like you build a good system for yourself. And again, you're vulnerable to put yourself out there. You know, it takes like a certain sacrifice of comfort to pursue something like this, whether it's film or writing, and many other industries, but, you know, specific to this conversation. But it's okay to build relationships with people and to leverage those to help yourself out and help the ones that are alongside you.
I think too, like real relationship building where everybody who is involved is equally invested in the other people's success, right? Because one thing that MLB, and I'm just speaking from like seeing as a job seeking, like I'm talking MLB, not baseball specifically right now, is that the jobs are scarce and it fosters a sense of competition among people who want them. And MLB profits off of that. And so then you have things where what we're starting to see is like representation alone does not solve these systematic problems. Obviously we just had the case with Jared Porter. Sure, obviously that was huge. He got excoriated on the internet. But also there was a really quiet dismissal of a long-term hitting coach who'd been with the Mets since 2017, Ryan Ellis, who women had reported to a female employee relations manager. They had reported him to that and nothing got done about that. So obviously just having a woman in that position didn't necessarily help anything get better. So I think just that idea of like, you can't be in this for yourself. You have to genuinely be invested in other people around you and seeing them succeed too and taking on these systems. But I will admit that I feel very, and I mean, this could be the Kevin Mather stuff weighing on me too. I feel kind of despondent about, as much as MLB says, like, we're making these hires and we're opening things up and things are getting more diverse. Like, are things really changing, do you think? Let's just throw that out to the panel in general.
Well, I mean, I've been thinking about this all day, and this was even before the Mather news, but I don't think so, because for me, and I spoke about this on Twitter, it's about breaking down systemic and institutional racism, sexism, all the isms. This isn't about addressing Mather and having him fired or something like that. That doesn't really change the issue. Transformative change comes from breaking down these systems that reinforce all this nonsense and building it back up, where inclusivity is a fundamental piece of that new system. Like this is a systemic and institutional issue. And just focusing on the short-term things or the immediate aesthetically
eyewash. Baseball players call this eyewash.
I mean, I wouldn't call all of it eyewash, because I think some of these things are important. Like, I think ways to get more black ball players into the game
absolutely
isn't eyewash, but at the same time, it's part of a systemic issue, not that, travel teams are too expensive. Like, it's a part of something much larger than that. And just focusing on the cost of travel ball for youth black baseball players isn't really addressing the issue of black ball players playing in the professional ranks and ultimately in Major League Baseball. So for me,
players on the field doesn't mean you're getting black executives into front offices, which is lagging very far behind.
Right. But it's not, even if you have black ball players, that doesn't mean that like an organization is going to draft black ball players. Like the Mariners have a bunch of black ball players, but that doesn't mean that it's created some trend across the league.
Right.
It's systemic. It's larger than that. So until Major League Baseball as a private company is ready to really address the systemic and institutional issues, we're going to keep repeating this cycle and just looking at, these small moments of change or impact, but not really fundamentally transforming it into what it should be.
And then how do we go beyond inclusivity being the involvement that we have the folks in the roles, similar to the travel ball point, do the black players on the travel ball team feel like they belong on that travel ball team? Or do they feel similar to how some Major League Baseball ball players feel like there's, 3 or 4 of them on the team that can talk together while they're stretching, but they don't really have the full feel like they belong at the same level in the clubhouse? Just listening to some of the stories that were told, like in the article in The Athletic last year, interviewing some of the former players, to where even guys at the top of the game, like a Torrey Hunter, may not always feel comfortable or like he belongs in that space, but now as an executive has the opportunity to have some impact and have some of the decision making. Because I think it's not just being being seen. It's not just being hired, but it's also having the ability to make decisions and be involved in decisions. That's the only way you can break down the process and the system that's in place and then replace it with one that'll help in the future going forward. And for everybody, an entire ecosystem, make sure fans have a feeling that they belong, make sure every members of the media feel like they belong. All those aspects that we see these problems keep popping back up because we've got to change the way that we make decisions and the way we enforce them.
Truly giving people a seat at the table, not just inviting them to the party and having them stand in the corner awkwardly. Right. Janice, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, absolutely. So to your point earlier, Kate, about just kind of like not necessarily just being there for yourself, but being there for others too. And so I was thinking about how a lot of the times women can be just as complicit in upholding all of these oppressive power structures. And a lot of the times it's white women too. So we definitely need to be aware of that. And most certainly say in the event that I'm ever in a position of power, like I definitely just need to make sure that, say, everyone has a seat at the table. So yeah, MLB can be diverse and just hire just a diverse team, like until like they're blue in the face. But of course, I mean, if nothing is like done on the inclusivity side, then it's meaningless. Right. So I think kind of on what Jamal said, just making sure that everyone feels like they belong, and not just players too, but fans. And everyone can most certainly do a part in this. So I think one example I can think of off the top of my head is Cole Tucker putting his pronouns in his bio. Like, I think that's absolutely fantastic that he did that. It just shows that it's normalized, and the more it happens, then the more that people who may be non-binary or say transgender will feel like they belong.
Absolutely. I think also we need to have MLB and teams shift from this idea of like the onus is on the candidates to come to them all the time. Like, oh, we'd love to hire a woman, we'd love to hire people of color, but they just don't apply. And when they do, they don't have the right skill set for what we're looking for in the position. Like, no, you need to actively go and find those people. Don't put the onus on the people who are victims of systematic oppression to solve their own oppression. That's just another form of oppression. So putting that out there and making pathways for people to enter these front office jobs and diversify these front offices and make them true spaces of representation. So yeah, it is normalized that like, of course I'd put my pronouns in my bio. Like,
but I mean, I'm sorry not to cut you off, but I mean, I agree, but also think that, you know, and MLB, I want to be clear, is not alone in doing this. A lot of it is just, I'm hooking my boy up. Right. Or I'm hooking up this Ivy League graduate because I'm an Ivy League graduate. I mean, June Lee did a great piece on ESPN last year detailing those networks, you know, and a lot of it, whether you had the qualifications or not, whether you had a bang up interview, a lot of times it doesn't matter. They're looking out for their boy, you know, or, you know, they come on the recommendation of a friend, and they're perpetuating that cycle. You know, so it's not on the candidate, but also like we need to get rid of this idea that it's okay to just always give into nepotism, you know, and that has a lot to do with it. Like people that are in many of these positions in MLB franchises haven't necessarily earned it, you know, and they might not be the best candidate, but they were the right candidate in that context, you know, so. That's what I'm saying. It's like it's about systems, and that it's more complicated than just like who goes after who or who brings themselves to whoever's attention. Because even when that happens, they still might not get it just because simply they didn't go to Harvard or Yale, or they weren't in this particular like program with this guy, or you know what I'm saying? Like, so, you know, it's a much more complicated web that allows these systems and structures to reinforce themselves. And it's not just for, obviously for Black and brown people, Asian people, it's women, it's the LGBTQ plus community. I mean, it's across the board. So it's just the power structures need to shift on a lot of levels.
For sure. And that's something that I would love to see the media take more of an active role in too, is critique. You have the Tides report that comes out every year that analyzes diversity in MLB. I would love to see national or local markets, beat writers pick up on that more and really start to push the team, because public opinion will sway, but they have to know what they're up against. Kind of, you have to know, like, this is what your executive office of your favorite MLB team looks like. Don't you want them to do better? Because if the fans make noise, ultimately in this business, money talks, right? So if the fans make noise and the fans say, we will put our dollars into you, but only if you represent our values, then that can start to make change from that end as well. Because it can be frustrating to think about how these old boy systems work together and then just perpetuate, because each one graduated a little bit lower than the next one, who knows the next guy down, and so on and so on. So
yeah, and even in baseball, especially for a lot of the black executives in the front office, it was mostly former players. And then the goalpost shifts right when you start getting close and you start seeing some hires to the analytics copycat trends, and everyone's trying to go and get the best Ivy League person that they can. But you can't tell me that there's not a person of color or a woman at that same Ivy League school with the same qualifications at the same time. NASA's hiring them to go put items on Mars. They can certainly come and understand pitchers and hitters, right? So they're out there. You just have to, I think we've said it already, but make it an effort to go look at and understand what are the trends in hiring, where are candidates coming from, and how can we widen that net to make sure that we're getting the best talent into the league versus just the people that are associated with the others. And I think you mentioned the media, but some of the media members also have to realize that that's how they got their jobs. And so it would be a weird situation to call someone else out if you got your job through knowing somebody or that connection and how those things build in. So all of the web is across the entire ecosystem.
Absolutely. I want to get into a couple of the questions we got here. Thank you, everybody who's been contributing to the Q&A. One that I want to ask from Nick Tuck 3. You've spoken a lot about the vulnerability of putting yourself out there. Has there ever been a time when that vulnerability resulted in feeling completely overwhelmed? How did you deal with that? And I'm interested in this question because something I think about a lot is, like, I think it's important to have a woman's perspective when you're writing a domestic violence story a lot of times. But when you ask women reporters to consistently be telling these stories, and you're seeing a lot of this with, like, women reporters or women who are telling their stories to other reporters, just constantly have to go through this process of trauma of telling the story over and over again, writing it down. For some people, that can be very healing. For others, that can be re-traumatizing. So is there ever a time where, like, yes, diversity is our strength, but also sometimes I'm like, oh, here comes the domestic violence story. That probably means I'm going to get assigned it, or at least I need to wait. It's like a responsibility that you have to carry.
Well, for me specifically, obviously, I'm not a woman, so I don't have that burden when it comes to the domestic violence issues that have been permeating, or at least have been brought to our attention more lately. But when it comes to issues of race, yeah, I mean, people will kind of turn to me, or, like, I know that there's some, like, expectations that I'm going to speak on everything. And at least at Views, I haven't written one thing about it. I don't feel like it's my responsibility to do so. If I feel compelled to speak about it, then I will, but I don't feel the burden, because I don't think racism is my burden to carry. I don't think sexism is a burden for women to carry. So I don't necessarily feel compelled, but I do have moments where it's like, oh, here we go again. Like, that people probably have some expectation, but you don't have to meet the expectation. You know, it's okay to sit a couple topics out and
protect your energy, right?
Exactly
falls under protecting your energy.
Right. And just saying it's all right that I don't always have to share my opinion. I don't always have to say something. I can sit this one out. But, like, when it comes to vulnerability in general, I think the same idea applies. That it's not always vulnerability in terms of like these specific subjects because we have a unique perspective on things or come from like the non-mainstream communities, but just for anything, like sometimes you need a break and it's okay to step back, and if you feel like you're being drained or you're overwhelmed, those are the moments. If you can feel it in the moment, then those are the times when you pull back and focus on other things, or you take a break, you step away, you focus on other stuff, other hobbies, whatever those things are to help bring you back to your space of good energy. Then I think that you do that. Because yeah, sure, there's times when it's overwhelming for me as well, especially as a filmmaker. You're taking on so many other people's stories and you have this burden of representing them in an accurate manner while also being true to the story itself. And that could take its toll. But then you just have to say, I'm going to step away from this for a while. And then when I'm ready to come back, I'll come back and then get right back to it. So I think one big thing is protecting yourself. And making sure that you're okay so that when you come back, you can attack it with full force.
Which is hard in an industry that really prides hustling, right? But taking that step back can be very important. How about, does it ever frustrate you guys? Anna Wagon wants to know, does it ever frustrate you guys to see national writers bungling attempts at discussing inclusivity? Like, you could do it better, but don't necessarily have the platform they do. Bungling is an interesting word there. I'll go ahead and toss that over to I'm sure I have my examples I can think of, but I'll toss that to the panel.
Yes, it's definitely frustrating to see. Man, yeah, especially when you see a take on the timeline and someone is trying to, I guess, I don't know if this is the right word, but kind of appropriate your experience and kind of express kind of what they think you're going through. Goodness, and I guess to also answer the last question and answer this one too. I tend to stray away from, say, a lot of domestic violence type things in like TV and movies, just mainly because I myself have experience with domestic violence, but at the same time, like especially if you're writing those stories, one of the things that you have to definitely remember is that you're telling someone else's story and kind of compartmentalize your own. So there is some trauma involved in that. But again, when it comes to national writers just bungling things in general, it's always, I don't know, at this point, it's almost expected to see. And yeah, I guess the one thing from here on out is to maybe hope that one day I can be in that position and actually do a good job. So.
Yeah, and I think to add on to that, some my observations, both whether it's professionally or personally, is sometimes the people with the loudest voices or the largest audiences are the people that are the least capable to talk about certain subjects. And then sometimes you have other folks that are fully capable, but are either uncomfortable or don't have the audience or the reach to be able to get that message across, I think, effectively. And that's where when it's within my mental capacity to assist, try to put that point out there, because otherwise that's the only thing people have available to consume. And so then other people start believing that those bungled attempts are the reality or the approach to view to it. But similar to like what we said, you see sometimes, I think the other piece for the vulnerability to the previous question is having that network of folks that you can reach out to. So if you are doing something that's outside your comfort zone, or you're not sure, there's someone that you can reach out to and ask, hey, what is your thought on this? And can you take a look at this for me before I go forward with it? An opinion that you respect that can help reduce some of that vulnerability or concern.
I love that. Let's see.
Sadly, we're past the
Yeah,
hour
we have
mark.
some other great questions. Thank you guys so much for throwing those all in there. Unfortunately, we're out of time.
Yeah, I'm really sorry, but this was really a fantastic panel. I really can't thank all of you enough for taking the time. It's an important one, and I'm really happy that you're all able to do this. So really, thank you all, Randy, Kate, Jamal, Janice. Thank you guys so much for all of your time.
Thank you.
Nick,
Thank
for
you.
being
Thanks for
with us.
having me.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for watching.
Thanks, everyone.
Take
Thanks
care.
for having me on.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.